The number one question almost all pre retirees have before they're able to comfortably retire is wanting to know what they have the ability to spend considering their financial resources in retirement. It's the one thing everybody wants to know. You've been saving your entire life, you're getting so close to retirement. You want the question answered, what do I have the ability to spend? Which in reality is going to determine the quality of your lifestyle in retirement. Answering that question sets the table for everything else. So, what is that answer for you specifically as you're getting closer to your future retirement? Hi, my name is Derek Delaney. I'm a certified financial planner, and these are the type of questions I help my clients answer for a living. So let's talk about what it really means to determine how much can I afford to spend in retirement. What a lot of people are trying to figure out is what is their true spending capacity? And the first thing we have to determine is how we define spending capacity or your maximum spending level is. And for most retirees, they want to understand how much they can comfortably spend in retirement, and that risk is determined by a risk of overspending in retirement or risk of underspending in retirement, and finding that sweet spot they're comfortable with in between those two variables, and knowing with a high level of confidence that they're going to be able to retain that spending level throughout retirement. So, spending capacity for an individual or a married couple with $2 million dollars in their portfolio could be completely different depending on the level of risk. And when we talk about risk, again, it's the risk of overspending or underspending in retirement at any given point. For example, somebody with $2 million dollars in their portfolio are maybe more risk adverse than their friends, and they would much rather spend less in retirement, knowing that the probability of retaining that spending level, regardless of how good or bad things get in retirement, their friends or neighbors across the street could retire with that same $2 million portfolio, and they maybe have a higher risk tolerance from an income variation standpoint. So they feel comfortable spending more, especially early in retirement, knowing that they have a higher probability of running into some sort of income variability. For most people, that would be an income cut at specific points in retirement if economic conditions deteriorate to a point where that is required. So you could spend more with your $2 million portfolio in retirement if you can take on more risk and have the ability to adjust your income at future points compared to somebody who doesn't have or want to take on as much income risk. And if that is you, your $2 million portfolio might only allow you to spend less than the same person with the same portfolio value day one of retirement. Let's look at how this plays out with a specific example. In this example, we have Mike and Sarah. They're both 60 years old today, and they both want to retire in 2026, January 1st of the new year. They want to pull the retirement trigger, and they're expected to have just a little over $2 million dollars in their portfolio. We are also assuming that they are not going to work part time, and they're going to have a little bit of Social Security income, about $2,700 a month for each of them, starting at full retirement age, which is 67. So that's not expected to kick in for another 7 years. And if we take a look at their income, you could tell that when they hit retirement in 2026, the majority of their retirement income will come from their portfolio distributions. And then when they get to a later age, you'd see here how Social Security kicks in, and the amount they're required to take from their portfolio continues to decrease as they get older. We believe Mike and Sarah will start spending less as they age, which is typical for most retirees. So within that simplified context, in their $2 million portfolio, Mike and Sarah are expected to have a net after tax spending capacity of around $106,000 year one in retirement. But again, we talked about that spending capacity is completely dependent on what their risk tolerance is from an income variability standpoint in retirement. This $106,000 number represents Mike and Sarah having a 70% chance or risk of underspending their plan and a 30% chance of overspending their plan. Underspending their plan means they make it to the end of life or the end of their retirement, and they're going to have more money than they think they want, meaning they have a higher chance of regret of not spending more of their money earlier in retirement while they were young and healthy enough to do so. The risk of overspending is getting to a point in retirement where your financial resources are completely drained before you get to the end, which is the biggest risk and the biggest fear for many retirees. And we take all the different variations of rates of return and inflations and those different sequences and mortality risks and run a regime-based simulation that gives us a percentage chance that they get to the end of life either underspending or overspending their plan. And if you are a more conservative person and you don't want to have as much variation in your retirement income, you are going to set your income in a more conservative way. So in this case, it's an 85% chance of underspending and only a 15% chance of overspending. And if we apply this to this specific retirement scenario, you will see that the spending capacity drops from $106,000 down to a lower amount. In this example, it brings it all the way down to $88,000 a year, year one in retirement, net after tax. The reason it dropped so much is because in this retirement planning software, the amount that gives Mike and Sarah the highest chance of being able to live in that 85 to 15% range of overspending and underspending, the income amount that allows them to live in that range most consistently is $88,000 net of tax per year. Now, let's just say we talk to their neighbors who have that same $2 million portfolio. They're far more risky. And they say, hey, I can take on a risk of only 60% chance of underspending my plan and increasing the risk of overspending and running out of money in retirement up to 40%. This means there is a much higher likelihood that they're going to hit points in retirement where they're going to have to reduce their income because of poor economic performance to make the rest of their retirement viable. But because they are okay with taking on that risk, they can spend more earlier in retirement, and their spending capacity because of those risk parameters are now almost $120,000 a year net of taxes compared to $88,000 a year, even though both portfolio balances are the same and both expected Social Securities and mortality risks are the same. So it's important to understand that when you're trying to figure out the amount of money you can spend comfortably in retirement, a lot of it has to do with the economic circumstances, the rates of return and inflation sequences you will ultimately experience in retirement. Another big factor is, yes, the value of your retirement portfolio and other income sources you have in retirement. But one big factor you need to include in all of that as well, which makes a big difference, is the amount of risk you're comfortable taking from an income variation standpoint in retirement. If you can take more income risk and you feel confident that you can spend more earlier in retirement, knowing that you can tighten your belt, meaning reduce the amount of income you spend later on in life, if economic conditions force you to do so, then you do have the ability to spend more in retirement. But if you're somebody who goes, even if economic conditions were to get really bad, I don't want to have to change my income. I don't want any income variation, regardless of what happens from an economic rate of return or inflation standpoint in retirement. Then you're somebody who most likely will have a smaller spending capacity in retirement, because spending less earlier in retirement is going to create more buffer for when things get bad, therefore reducing the probability of you having to cut your income at any future point in retirement. And then monitoring these numbers as economic and spending opportunities change for you in retirement is going to give you the best chance of not waking up someday and realizing that, oh no, I've completely run out of money in retirement. Now I have to sell my investments, go to cash and get a part-time job, or getting to an older age in retirement when you're 85, 90 and realize you're sitting on all this money that you could have otherwise spent and enjoyed on yourself or with other loved ones earlier in retirement while you were young and healthy enough to do so. So, spending capacity, how much can you spend with a $2 million portfolio? The variation is completely dependent on what your risk tolerance is, what your income sources are expected to be in retirement, and what your cash flow variability is. Meaning, do you have the ability to adjust or cut your income when economic conditions determine you have to? That all plays a major influence in what your spending capacity is as far as what you can comfortably spend in retirement day one with a $2 million portfolio. Again, my name is Derek Delaney. These are the type of conversations, and this is the type of work I do for my clients for a living. So if you're interested in learning more about what your specific spending capacity number is, I invite you to schedule a free consultation, and I'd be happy to spend 25, 30 minutes having that conversation with you to hopefully provide you with clarity on where you sit from a retirement planning standpoint. You can schedule that free consultation using the link below in the video description. Until that future conversation, happy retirement planning.